Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from ItalianGenealogy.blog, and I'm here with Teresa Sipe, and she's going to tell us about her family from Calabria. So, good morning, Teresa.
Good morning, Bob.
How's everything there?
Well, today we got sunshine, so it's a good day.
Oh, good. We're a little cloudy today.
Oh, well.
So thanks for being here. My first question for you is, what got you started on your research?
Well, my father passed away in 2010. And when he did, I realized I didn't know where his parents were buried. So I went on a quest. How am I going to find out the cemetery? Because there was 4 or 5 in the town where we lived. I got an idea, obituary. So I taught myself how to go to the local newspaper, get the date of the obituary. I went to the local historian society, and they had them all on file. So I filled out the form, got the obits, and found the graves of my grandparents. And as I'm doing this, I thought, well, gee, I don't know too much about my mom's family either. So maybe I should do this for them. And so it began.
Oh, so that's really cool. That's really cool. So I'm just going to assume that your dad's family has been in the country a long time. Yeah.
Yes. My dad, he was the one that taught me about family because he had none. Basically, both his parents, I never knew his mom. She died very early. I did know his father. He had a sister who was very autistic, and so I didn't know her I met her one time. And it just felt to me like nobody should pass through this earth and not know where they're buried. And so that's why I did it. And
Yeah, that's kind of the way I feel. I mean, obviously, I know my parents and my grandparents, they're all here. But when
yes.
you go back to Italy and try to find things there, it's very frustrating because you can't just go to a cemetery and find people, or the research is just that much harder, as I guess you know. So what have been your most amazing discoveries?
My most amazing discovery was the finding of my great uncle Raphael. Uncle Raphael, he immigrated in 1910, leaving his wife and baby behind in Amantea, Italy. He came to Pennsylvania, where I'm originally from, settled in Indiana County, Pennsylvania. There he became a coal miner. After 8 years, in 1918, he decided it was time to get his citizenship. So he joined the Army. World War I was on at the time. So he went to Germany. But I talked to his grandson later, and I said, what do you know about this guy, about your grandfather Raphael? Whatever happened to him? He said, my dad told me he went to Germany, was killed, he's buried in Germany, and nobody knows where the body is. So I thought, oh my God, how tragic. So we hung up the phone, and I immediately went into Indiana County coal mines. Now, the grandson told me he worked at the San Marie coal mine. And I'm looking for San Marie. Can't find a thing. Then it hit me. It must be St. Mary's. San Marie is what the Italians would call it. So I looked for St. Mary's, and there it was. I searched all the sites, couldn't find his name anywhere. So I went into Indiana County, the county seat site. And they had a link there called immigration. So I clicked on it, and every immigrant into that county was listed. Problem was, they weren't alphabetized. Bob, I sat for 3 hours and read every line, and I found him. And I found his address. So I thought, okay. I called the county seat, I called the office. I identified myself. I told the lady I was speaking to that I was trying to locate my great uncle. Could she help? Gave her the information I had. She said, give me 45 minutes to an hour. Well, I got a call back from the county of Indiana, and they told me that my Uncle Raphael had joined the Army in February 1918 and was discharged in February 1920. And I explained to her that the family understood that he had been killed in Germany and his body was buried there. And she said, no, no, no. She said he was discharged February 1920, and in September 1920, he caught the smallpox and died, and he was buried in a cemetery in Indiana County, Pennsylvania. So I said, well, where? What's the name of the cemetery? She said, I'll call you back. I have to go to a different area for that. So half hour later, she called me back. She gave me the name of the cemetery, the grave location, and she also sent me a picture of the headstone. And of course, it was, you couldn't read it. The lettering had all worn off because it was 80, almost 90 years later. So I was talking to a childhood friend, and I explained the situation to them about him dying of smallpox and the family thinking he's dead in Germany. And she said, well, I know how to get his death certificate. So I said, please show me how. So she did, and I did get a copy of the death certificate. And under marital status, it's marked single. So that could explain why the family was never notified of his death during a smallpox epidemic. However, from February to September, why didn't his family know that he was in America and that he wasn't dead? I guess he took that to his grave because no one knows.
Wow, that's interesting.
And that's how I found my Uncle Raphael.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of detective work, that's for sure.
Yes, it was. But it was so worth it because I called the grandson. I said, I have found the body of your grandfather. Gave him the information, and as luck would have it, he had a brother that lived very close to Indiana County. He said, I will call my brother, I will tell him this information, and he will go to the grave. So guess what? After almost 100 years, he finally had someone visit his grave.
Wow. Boy, that's something.
That, to me, was what this whole thing is about.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I think when you discover something like that, or even just finding people that, you wouldn't be here unless those people were there, right. Or exactly. Finding a little bit about their history, and
yes.
it's kind of part of you. At least, I guess for us people who are crazy about this stuff.
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with PhilItaly.com. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co.
Well, Bob, when I was a small child, I wasn't outside playing. I was in-house reading because I loved my library, or I sat and was going through my mom's photographs. And there was one photo. Now, I was a very small child. I was not in school yet. That's why I had time to sit and look at the photographs. I came across a photograph of a little tiny short woman with a black purse on her arm, tall gentleman with a handlebar mustache, gray hair, very distinguished looking. And I said to my mom, "Who's this lady?" And she said, "That's my mother's sister, Antoinette." Oh. And then I came across a picture of 4 youthful young adults. Well, who are these people? Those are my cousins in Italy. Now, this was preschool. That's when I learned I had family in Italy. I had no idea who these people were. So when I was 25 years old, I gave birth to my son. Now, my mother had one sister. My mother was already passed at this time. I was 27 years old. And she had one younger sister, and I took my son to visit her. And anytime her and I had a few minutes together, I would say to her, "Tell me about my nanny." And first thing she would always say is, "She was a saint." Well, as we talked, she says to me, "I have the address of family in Italy. Do you want it?" I said, "Well, yeah, sure." So she gave me the address of Antonia. And so in my youthful wisdom, I sat down and I wrote a letter in English to Italy. 3 weeks later, I get a letter back. It's written in Italian. Well, I can't read Italian. Nobody in my family can read Italian. All the old people are gone. They're all dead. Well, what am I going to do? There was one lady in the neighborhood, because I lived in Little Italy. There was one lady in the neighborhood who still sounded like an Italian, because she had just immigrated in 10 or 15 years. So I took the letter to her. She got a pen and she drew all kinds of lines all over the letter. And then she finally said to me, "No, I can't read it." She said, "From a different part of Italy." So apparently she didn't get the dialect. So that would have been in 1974. 3 weeks later, I get a box. I open the box, and in the box are dried figs. And they are on wooden skewers. And one fig on the top of the box had candy sprinkles on it. So naturally, my attention was drawn to this fig. Took it out of the box, removed it off the skewer, opened it up, and oh my gosh, there was a gold brooch in it with my name, Teresa. I was in awe. Oh my God. And here is this letter, and these figs are from this lady, this Antonia, and I don't know what the letter says, and how am I going to thank her if I write to English? She's not going to understand. I was in a position where I was so confused. So, Bob, I never answered that letter.
Wow, that's some story. And you don't know what the brooch is.
I never knew what it said. I never knew what the letter said until 2013.
Wow.
In 2013, I was introduced to a woman up in Pennsylvania who had immigrated when she was 14 years old. And she had married a man, and he was a businessman, but she always spoke Italian, even though she didn't have an accent, and she could read the letter, and she translated it for me. And basically what it said was, when she got my letter, she took it to her daughter-in-law's house because her daughter-in-law had a 10-year-old son by the name of Mario who was learning English in school. However, Mario didn't do very well, okay? And so she told me that she was 75 years old, how many children she had, that she had one daughter who was very sick and lived with her. She wished me long life and good health, and she signed it Antonia. Okay? So that was the letter, basically. So, in 2016, I decided I'm going to Italy. Now, I knew I had found my grandfather's people, but deep down in my heart, I was hoping that somehow I would find my grandmother's people. No one ever mentions them to me. So I go to Italy, and the first night I'm there, I say to my Pellegrino cousin, do you know if the Bassarelli family still lives at Amantea? She said, I think we have an employee that's related somehow. Now, Bob, what I had done over all these 40 years, I had an album, and everything that I ever found concerning my grandmother, I kept in this album because I didn't want to lose anything. So when I went to Italy in 2016, that was my first visit. First time I met my Pellegrino family, first time I met the Bassarelli family. So when I had started my quest on this, I would call my cousins and say, do you have a picture of your grandmother so-and-so? Oh, sure, yes, I'll send it right to you. I didn't have a cousin who was uncooperative with me. Anything they had, they offered. And so I had quite a collection of pictures, albums, information. So when I went to Italy in 2016, guess what? I packed every one of these albums because I figured the people in Amantea don't know what the people in Pennsylvania look like. So I took everything, including this album of my grandmother. So my Pellegrino cousin says to me, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, you can meet this person. Okay. So I walked to the store that they owned, the shop that they owned, and I was introduced to a man by the name of John Pierre. John Pierre and I went to the back of the store, and I had this little album, and he started to go through it. First couple pages were pictures of my grandmother, no recognition. Then he came to the picture of the little lady with the black purse and the tall gentleman with the handlebar mustache. He pointed to it and he said, "Mi grandma." My mouth fell open.
Wow, that's amazing.
I said, "That's Antoinette." He said, No, Antonia. I said, "No, Antoinette," because my mother told me her name was Antoinette. And he said to me, "Little name for Antonia." In other words, Antoinette was her nickname. I didn't know I was dealing with the same person. So I said to him, "What can you tell me about my grandmother's family?" And she has 2 nephews and a niece still living. And that picture of the 4 young adults, one of the nephews, Salvatore, and one of the nieces, Donetta, is still living, and I got to meet them. I sat at their tables. The first one I went to visit was Donetta. Now, Donetta is also a nickname. Her actual name is Antonia. She was named after her mother. But everybody called her Donetta to reduce the confusion. So 2016, I go to visit her. We're sitting at the table. And I have my Pellegrino cousin with me. Her name is Thomasina. And they're talking back and forth in Italian. Of course, I don't understand. Well, there was a lull in the conversation. So I began relating the story of the box of figs to my cousin Thomasina, sentence by sentence. When she got to the part where I opened the fig and found the brooch, Donetta said gold, and she said it in English. I said to Thomasina, how does she know this? Turns out, when her mama was packing the figs, of course she put the brooch in the figs so she wouldn't have to pay duty on the gold. She said to her mother, Mama, do you suppose we should put the candy on it so it will not get lost? Bob, I'm sitting at the table with a woman who put the candy sprinkles on the fig 40 plus years ago.
Wow, that's one incredible story. I can't believe it. That's amazing.
I started to cry.
Sure.
How can this happen to me? How can I be so lucky? So Donetta, she gets up and she goes to her purse and she opens her purse and she takes out a little wee tiny, like one of those pictures that you got in the photo machines of her, quite a few years younger. And she slid it across the table to me. And she said, for you. And I was so shook with emotion that she would give me something so valuable. So we leave her house. I get into the car. I'm bawling like a baby. My cousin Thomasina looks at me and she says, Teresa, destiny. And I said, yes, you're right. So we leave Donetta's house and we go to visit Salvador. Salvador meets us outside his house. He embraces me. He's crying, and he's crying, and he's crying. And I can't understand why all the tears. Well, they went on to explain to me that my grandmother immigrated before any of these children were born. So they didn't know her. For all intents and purposes, I was her blood. And they were finally getting to know their auntie, their Zia. So we go into Salvador's house. Salvador sat on my left. His wife, Rita, sat on my right. And so, everybody was talking at once. Out came the lemon jello, out came the wine, the food. You know how Italians are. They're so generous. So Rita's holding my hand, and in front of me sits the album of my grandmother. So she pulls it over to herself, and she starts looking through it. Well, she comes to the page where the letter is. She pointed to it, and in Italian, she said, I wrote this. And Thomasina translated for me. I said, no. I said to my cousin, I said, it was written by Antonia. And the story goes, Antonia was illiterate. She could neither read or write. So when Mario didn't do such a good job translating the letter, her daughter-in-law Rita Antonia dictated this letter to Rita, and Rita wrote it and sent it off to me. So Rita took it out of the envelope. Towards the end of the letter, there was one little sentence, and it said, "Goodbye, Mario." When she got to this point, she put her hand over her head, over her eyes. She bowed her head, and I could see she was emotionally shook. And I looked at my cousin immediately, and I said, "What's wrong? How have I offended her?" Because she's crying. She's so emotional. Well, to make a long story short, Mario grew to a young man, and in his early 20s, he was killed in a motorcycle accident. Rita turned to me, and in Italian, she said, "Thank you for bringing the spirit of my son home to me."
That's amazing.
was-
This is, I've done about 8 of these. That is certainly the most amazing story I've heard. It's incredible.
And Bob, everyone says to me, "You got to put it in a book.
You should.
You got to put it in a book." I don't know how to do that. So anyway, so that is the story with them. And so I asked, so as I'm leaving the building, she goes to her little cabinet and she's getting all this salami out and all, and she's giving me all salamis and cheeses and, they're so generous. And so then the question is, how did I find my family in Italy? I didn't even know I had a family in Italy. I thought they were all dead because I was a little girl when my mom told me about the picture. But here I am growing up, and I've decided to do this. My dad died in 2010, so all those years have passed, and I'm assuming everybody's dead. And so I start when my mom got sick. Okay, I got her box of photographs because I asked for them. I also got my grandmother's macaroni strainer that she got when she married my grandfather in 1916. So after my dad passed, I got the pictures, and I'm going through them, okay? Now, I had found the old pictures that I had seen before, and I came across a prayer card. And this prayer card was for one of the ladies over in Italy, and it turned out to be Antonia's prayer card when she died. But I knew this lady, okay? I knew her, and she had died a long time ago. So I just kind of overlooked it. Well, as I'm going through this box of pictures, what do I come across? My grandmother's passport. Oh my goodness, this is my grandmother's passport. It's got the name of her mother and father on it. It's got her birth date. It's got information where she came from. I was beyond myself. I thought, how lucky can I be? So I find a book in there, and the book turned out to be my father's graduation from boot camp when he joined the Navy, World War II. And I can remember going through this book and pointing to my dad's picture and saying, "That's my daddy, that's my daddy." So I went looking through the book to see that picture, and I come across another passport. It's my grandfather's passport. And I'm thinking, how can I be so lucky to have them both? And it's got all now my grandfather's is not quite as plain and as clear and as pristine as my grandmother's, but nevertheless, I have it. It's mine. Then I come across a little navy blue book. And I opened the book. Now, my grandfather, from the year 2016 or 1916, when he married my grandmother, he worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad. And this book was like a membership book for the Union. His name is on it, Francesco Pellegrino, dated April 14th, 1917. I thought, oh, how cool is this? So I started flipping through the pages to see if maybe there's something else in there about him. And Bob, I came across a feather. It was a blue feather, approximately 4 inches long, and it had just a little bit of brown along the side. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, my grandfather or my grandmother picked this up off the ground where I was born and saved it. I thought, how cool is that? So in 2016, I go to Amantea, and my husband and I are walking down the street, and I see a feather on the ground. It's the same size as the blue feather, only difference was it's a brown feather with a little bit of blue in it. So I picked it up, wrapped it up, carried it home with me, and I laid them side by side. How many people can say their grandmother found a feather where you were born, and you found a feather where they were born, and they have been joined together?
Right. Yeah. Nobody probably. That's really something.
You know, I mean, these little things that happened to me in my life leads me to believe that I was meant to do this.
Yes. Yes. I believe that.
You know, I was meant to do this.
Yeah. I mean, I feel the same way with some of my stuff. I like you. I always liked looking at the old photographs. Always wanted to see the old photographs with my mother.
Yes.
You know, and the black pages with the pictures in it.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
yeah, and my grandmother, she had cards from her father from Naples, his calling card, and she comes from two noble families. But my father's mother comes from two noble families.
Yeah, I can tell by your you know, your thing for on Facebook.
Right. Yeah. So I was always intrigued by that, and like you, I didn't start searching until maybe 12 years ago, but that was my starting point. But to your point about finding people and doing that, when I started finding people on Facebook from my grandmother's father's family mainly, they started sending me pictures, and you can see the resemblance between people. And there was a cousin of my grandmother's, I think a second cousin, and she's there with her mother, and she looks just like my grandmother. She's the spitting image of my grandmother. It was amazing.
My mother has a first cousin by the name of Felicia. They could be twins.
Right.
They are first cousins. And I walked in, I was invited for lunch one day this last Christmas. I went over for Christmas and New Year. And I was invited to a cousin's house for lunch. There was a whole house full of people. You know how the Italians do, great big long table.
Yep.
And as I walked in the door, there was sat this woman on this couch. And all I saw was her profile. And my heart stopped. And I walked over to her, and I put my hands on her face, and I said, "Cousin Cugina Felicia, this is the face of my mother."
Wow.
And then I got a picture out when my mother was older, and everyone said, oh my, it is true, it is true. She looks exactly like Zia Felicia. And, like I said, I didn't know I had family living in Italy. Didn't have a clue. And I'm on Facebook, and I'm just working on the people in the town that I knew. I went to my mother's younger sister. She gave me some names. I went and got their obits, so I was able to call people in town there because I have an old phone book here, that kind of thing. And then I had an aunt who passed away. Her husband was my mother's brother. And her granddaughter got her box of pictures. She called me one day and she said, hey, Teresa, she said, I have this box of pictures from my nanny. I'm going to send it to you because she lives in Pennsylvania and I live in Tennessee. I'm going to send it to you. You go through it, and anything you want, you can have. Well, gee, thank you. That's so, generous. So in a few days, I did get it, and I'm going through it, and I find a prayer card for Giuseppe Pellegrino. He died in 1972. Well, the name Pellegrino tells him he's my family. And so I called my cousin and I said, did you see this prayer card? She said, yeah. She said, that's my pappy's father, meaning my grandfather. I said, no. I said, his name was Francesco. This is Giuseppe. This guy doesn't look anything like him because I know my grandfather. So I thought, what am I going to do with this information? How am I going to find these people? So one day I'm sitting on the computer and my husband's got a doctor's appointment, and just as I was ready to get off the computer, something popped up from Amantea and the name Pellegrino. But I had just hit my button and it was gone. You know how that happens?
Yeah, I hate when that happens.
So we had to go to the doctor's, and it's like 23 miles away. So I thought to myself, well, when I come back, I can get on the computer and it's going to be there. Well, guess what? It wasn't. Well, then it occurred to me, if I'm seeing something from Amantea with the name Pellegrino, there's somebody out there that's connected somehow. So I took this prayer card and I posted it with a line that said, does anyone know who this gentleman is? Within 30 seconds, they started coming back. Me no no, me no no, me no no. And I would introduce myself, tell them who I was, that I was interested in doing the family history for the Pellegrinos, and to make a long story short, they welcomed me with open arms. One night I was on Messenger with two cousins, and they would give me a name, and then they would sit and tell me all the kids and all the grandkids, and I would write it all down. And then by this time, another message would come in from another cousin, and she had another name. And that's how I learned who the people were in Italy. It was purely by accident. I call them God winks.
Yeah, and I had the similar experience because as I was piecing it together, my grandmother's name is Piramalo, which is a very, very uncommon name. So I figured these, they had to be related in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And as we started comparing notes, what is your great great grandfather, and tracing it all back to the Duchess and the Count and all of that, they were just fabulous. And we were all supposed to meet on April 18th in Italy, but that's not happening now. So they were going to have a big lunch, and I was going to meet, they're distant, fourth cousins, and they were going to have, they were going to be one cousin was going to have her aunt and uncle there, who would be my third cousins. And this trip was all planned, and we were going to ancestral homes and all of this. And now with this, virus and all of that,
I
it's
know.
off. Hopefully, we're looking at October, so hopefully we'll get there. But, we were going to do this whole ancestry tour and all that kind of good stuff. And it's just sad, but hopefully it's just on hold until the
I know.
fall. And but like you said, they are so nice. I mean, I had no idea I had cousins there, and they obviously had no idea that I existed. And when you start making that connection, they were so, I was excited, but they were excited too, because they had no idea, and they didn't
Right.
know some of the history that I knew and what I learned, and
Right.
anything
Well,
about America.
It turns out that Uncle Giuseppe had 8 children, and 4 of them are still living. And I got to meet all 4 of them when I was there the first year. I was also taken to the homestead where my grandpap was raised. Now it's falling down into ruin. But Bob, I went over and I kissed that building, and it was a feeling come over me like I am home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If it weren't for this place, I wouldn't have grandchildren.
Right.
And it was so deep. It was so amazing, the feeling that comes over you. And then there was a big crack in the wall of the house. And right below this crack is a stone, because the house is made out of the the siding is like a stucco type thing. I picked this up and I put it in my bag, and I brought it home with me so that I will always have a little bit of Amantea with me in my home. And I have it today, and I'll never give it up. Never give it up.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
And yeah, I mean, it's just like, oh my gosh, this is Italy. Just came off of the building that my grandfather was raised in.
Yeah, and some of my, I mean, I know where my third great grandparents are from there, and the houses are still there, and the addresses are still there.
Yeah.
So it's going to be really great to go there and see it.
Well, I went back in 2017, and I went to see Donetta. She was the little lady that put the candy sprinkles on the fig. And with me, on this trip, I brought the brooch with me because I still had it. And oh, Bob, I showed it to her, and she didn't remember anything about it. Not a thing did she remember about it. And so when we went into her house, in the year's time, the house had fallen into such disrepair because her husband was very sick and he was dying when I was there. But she invited me in, and I sat down, and she came over and she stood beside me. Now, she had shrunk so much that with me sitting and her standing next to me, we were the same size. That's how tiny she was. And so she was talking to my cousin Thomasina, and she was telling Thomasina that someone came into her house and robbed her. And she was telling her about the robbery. I mean, the poor woman had nothing. But anyway, while she's talking, I'm holding her hand, and I'm studying her face. And I'm looking at the wrinkles, and I look at her hairline, and I look at her hands, and I kiss her hands. And on her sweater, she had a little safety pin. And I can remember seeing that when I was a little kid in Little Italy, the old ladies with their safety pins. And then I had a thought. It was a question. And I said to my cousin Thomasina, scusi, I have a question. And I had to interrupt her because it was a question that had to be asked that very second. I asked her to ask Donetta how old she was. Donetta said she was 83 years old. Now, my grandmother died when she was 53, exactly 30 years. And I thought, gee, if my grandma, if my Nunny had lived to be this age, would she have looked like this? And Bob, it was just like someone put their arm around my shoulder and got close to my ear, and I could almost feel the breath. And that the thing, whatever the thing was, said to me, "You have just seen the face of your grandmother." Now, my grandmother died in 1944. I was born in 1947. So all I ever saw of my grandma was a black and white photograph. And Bob, I knew right then and there I had just seen my grandmother. Something I've wanted to do all my life was to know my grandmother. And whether it's true or not, you know what, it's not important to anybody but me. In my heart, I know I experienced that. And in my heart, I know someone was telling me, hey, your grandma looked just like this. And so I don't have that regret anymore. I carried regret with me for years. Oh, if I'd only known my grandmother, if I'd only been able to love my grandmother. I carried that with me for years. But after this, Bob, I was able to let it go.
Yeah, and that's probably the reason. I believe that everything happens for a reason.
Yes, exactly. And at one time, now my grandfather came from a family of 8. Okay, he had one sister, Caterina. She died very young, so that left 7. He had one sister that was adopted in the family, and then he had 6 natural siblings, him and 5 others. Well, out of the 6, 5 of them immigrated to the town where my grandfather lived. One stayed behind, and that was Giuseppe. Okay, so Giuseppe stayed behind, and my grandfather kept talking to him, come to America, come to America. So Giuseppe was saving his money, and then they told me in Italy that one of his daughters got into trouble, didn't say what kind of trouble, got into trouble, needed money. So Giuseppe did what any parent would have done. The money he had saved, he gave to his daughter. So he had no money to immigrate. Well, my grandfather got mad at him and quit talking to him. And they both died, never speaking to each other again. But let me tell you another story. His youngest son from his second family, I went to visit him one time, and I took my pictures of Italy, Amantea, the family over there. He decided in September last year, he and his wife were going to take a trip to Amantea to visit the family. They were there for 9 days. He had a picture taken with Thomasina's father, whose name is Rocco, and because he's, so they're sitting side by side, their arms are around each other, and the 2 brothers are again together. I was so happy when I saw that.
Wow, that's nice.
It's just
That's
like
a great
all those
story.
years they were separated is all better now. It's all fixed. And I can say that because of me, they went over there, and because of me, these 2 brothers found each other again.
Wow, that's wonderful.
And it makes me very happy.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It truly does.
I'm sure.
Makes me very happy. And you see, my grandfather, My grandfather and grandmother got married in 1916. My grandmother was was 5 or 6 years older than my grandfather. She was pregnant with her 5th child when my grandmother discovered that he had not been faithful. He had a child to another woman. So my aunt told me when he got home from work that day, she asked him about it. He admitted it. And she said, "Get out. I don't need you anymore." So she raised 5 children alone. She never spoke English. She never learned the language. But every time her children would go out the door, she would say, "Remember, you speak the English, you American." You know? And I can hear her saying that. And so, as a consequence, out of the 5 children, 2 of the children never forgave him for his infidelity. Fortunately, my mother did. That was how come I learned the people, grew to love the people in his second family. If my mother hadn't been talking to her dad, I'd have never known him, and I'd have been out in the cold as far as this, research was, because they are, after all, his children too. So I asked my mother one time, I said, "Mom," I said, "why is it that you talk to Grandpap and the other ones don't?" And she said, "Because he's my father." And to me, that spoke lots. That spoke lots. She didn't approve of his infidelity, but he was still her father, and she still had brothers and sisters. Now that brings me to Veniqua. Before I started school, my mom would walk us down to their house. We would walk down the alleys to their house. And now we're talking 3 years old, 4 and 5 years old before I started school. And I would walk into the kitchen through the house. They had an aluminum screen door on the front door. I'd open the door. My grandfather would look over his shoulder, see it was me, and say, "Teresa, vieni qua. Teresa, vieni qua." So I would walk over, and he always had 2 rocking chairs. I would sit in one rocking chair, and he would sit in the other. Now, we didn't speak, because when he retired from the railroad, he said, "I will never speak English again." And he never did. But it was just important for me to sit with him. I don't know why. I can't explain it. I had to be near him. Now, this was, like I said, 67 years ago, something like that. I go to Italy in 2016. Now, I haven't seen my grandfather because he died in the 70s. I haven't seen him. I haven't, talked to anybody really seriously about him for years and years and years. So we go to Italy, and the cousin had a dinner and invited all the close family, and it was wonderful. And my cousin Thomasina was trying to get the attention of her daughter, who was talk, 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 talk. You know how young people are. So I looked over, and Gina was sitting there very quietly, not talking. And I hollered over, "Gina, vieni qua." My cousin looked at me, her mouth fell open. She said, "How do you know this?" And Bob, as true as I'm sitting here, I don't know where it came from. I hadn't heard it in years and years and years and years and years. But suddenly there it was on the end of my tongue. And I said it correctly. They knew exactly what I said.
Yeah.
How does that happen? And to me, it was just another one of those God winks. that, it's something I never forgot. When I started school, I didn't see my grandfather as much. And so I never went out on the porch to sit with him. And so he never said Teresa veni qua anymore.
Right.
But after all those years, I remembered it. And I used it in Italy. Oh my goodness. I used it in Italy. Absolutely remarkable.
Just one of those inbred things, I guess.
I know. It just, and I always tell everybody, and I don't know whether they believe it or not, that I have an angel in Omantea. And this year, we were there for Christmas and New Year. So my husband and I are walking through Omantea, and I see something shine on the street. And I walk over, and Bob, there laid a charm of the tree of life. And it was about the size of a quarter. And I picked it up, and I said to my husband, "Look what I just found. Do you think it's junk or what?" He said, "I don't know." He said, when we get back to the apartment, he said, "I'll check it out." So we met my cousin. We were going to do some shopping, and I took it out of my wallet. And I said to her, "Look what I found on the street in Omantea, downtown Omantea." She saw it was the tree of life. And again, she said, "Destiny." And I said, "Yes, I think you're right. I think I have an angel living in Omantea." And I truly believe that, Bob. I really do.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. But this has been fantastic. Great stories. I know people are going to love this.
Thank you.
It'll probably take me a couple of days to get it out there, but once I do, I'll send you the podcast link and the blog page and all of that, and you could share it around. And
okay, yeah, because the family wants to hear it.
Yeah, of course. All right, this is something that you could keep. Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook in the Italian Genealogy group or at www.italiangenealogy.blog.